Thank you, Shahar. I appreciate that. And just to kind of give a little background so that it makes some sense in terms of what my role in the research process has been. I've learned that my background was to study business and law. And in studying business and law, patents, trademarks, and intellectual properties was an area of interest for me. So having an opportunity to observe how that part of the process comes into play from the beginning of this whole research cycle, I realized right at the beginning that we had roughly 900 research students here at the university this summer. And out of the and we had an entire research village. And in the various areas that we were operating in, starting with, for example, my particular area was the computational biology area. I realized that the study in these areas is very, very broad. As you've heard research coming from a number of different areas, and it doesn't stop there. It's a massive undertaking in terms of research. So I wanted to understand a little more how the research process takes place. And usually, as in most things, there's a cycle, there's a life cycle. And that life cycle tends to start with funding and it kind of ends with funding. And so I wanted to address that. And my slide here in particular just kind of addresses, if you notice the colorful structure, that's actually a scanning of the carbon fibers the aerogel carbon fiber systems that they've studied throughout the entire process. There's a unique pathway with carbon, and if you remember, some of you are old enough to remember the old carbon paper that used to be inside of your documents. You used to pull it out, and you would sometimes get it on your hands, and it would be all over your hands and fingers, and then they got a little more sophisticated with it, and it ended up getting integrated into one sheet to another. And so as those sheets wrote, they took the paper out, but the carbon was always an interesting substance. And so coming to this stage here, I realized that right away we were going to be dealing in an area that I thought would be quite interesting, because I learned very quickly that the Arnold group that I was a part of was dealing in these carbon fibers, these and aerogels that had been derived from things as simple as egg whites, and taking egg white proteins and then turning these into carbon by baking them at very, very high temperatures. And you're going to see here in just a moment some of those processes that took place. But there's been some amazing research that's come out of this. But this research cycle, I wanted to first off address as you see it here. The research cycle right at the top starts with solving problems. What is the issue? What is the problem? How can we solve a problem? Once we move beyond that process and develop this problem solving, which has been taking place, each and every one of the speakers who've come up before me have been talking about a various area of discipline that they're working in, but they're problem solvers. And so as they move through this problem solving technology, they come up with inventions. And these inventions that are being developed at some point will turn into some level of an item that needs protection. It's an intellectual property at some point. And that property that becomes what we see on the end of the spectrum usually needs disclosures along the way. At some point along the way, we have to figure out, how do you not let this technology get away from you, and you can continuously making improvements for society. Their benefactors are obviously that's going to need that. In our case, we were working with the ability to take desalinated water and desalination of the water through a filtration process, and allowing that desalination process to come out with clean drinking water, removing the particles out of this water. And so we move to the disclosure phase. The next phase we move into is the assessment of these products. So before they hits the market, there's an assessment process that needs to take place. Is it something that's already been done? Is it a product that at some point may be at a stage that we need to do additional research before we take it to the marketplace, before we take it and try and find someone to invest in this product at that level? And if that is the case, then what kind of protections can we place or put in place before these products are released, or before these inventions are released? Some of the inventions and we've had some that are quite amazing, as you'll find out. Here's some very recently. As a matter of fact, there was one uh, patent that had just been released here at Princeton over the last year that was quite noteworthy. It was dealing during the medical phase. I'm sorry, it was the pandemic phase. Yes, I'm sorry, the pandemic. And when during the pandemic, and so there it was research that was done right here at Princeton that was a part of that. And so when that type of technology is coming to the market, again, it has to be something that's going to allow that to take place. So we move from there to the marketing of the products, to startups, or if you choose to start up, some of these will spin off into individuals owning their products and wanting to be involved with the development of it as it goes into the industry. Others may decide that they want to continue to do the work in the lab and they want to turn it over to an industry and allow that to continue to expand from there, giving it to an existing company. It then moves into a phase of licensing, consequently into commercialization, and then into revenue that is starting to be generated. And that revenue is quickly reinvested back into the universities and back into the research that was developed. Now, this particular slide here just kind of speaks to all of the various amounts of research that takes place. But at the end of the process, there's usually a single idea that turns into that one light bulb, that one piece of research that ultimately turns out to being the one that needs that entire process. Now, much of the funding comes from this particular organization that's deeply involved with the funding processes. So the grants that are written, the National Science Foundation has been around since 1950s, and they work very closely with universities. They've developed an entire department where much of the research that needs to happen, they understand that they have a three-phase process that they approach it with. One is the promoting of the progress of science. Another is the advancement of the national health and prosperity and welfare. And then the third area is national security. So many of the things that you see that take place here, these plasma machineries, I've went to some plants, the facilities that actually are involved in much of the development of many of these plasma technologies right now, and fossil technologies, and it's just an amazing thing to see as you go along with it. But this particular little slide here was one that I found to be pretty interesting because it just addressed the lightweight aerogel that turns the elements that make up this aerogel are so fascinating that it's delicate. The flower that you see that's sitting on top of that is delicate enough to allow that Bunsen burner underneath it to burn and not destroy the flower. Well, the research that's going on in the carbon gel, as you can see there, is pretty broad. Our research, of course, dealt with the ability to desalinate water through the carbon fiber. But we also have found that the research goes on in areas of thermal installations, aerospace and aviation, oil spill cleanups, protective clothing and gear, building materials, energy storage, soundproofing, environmental remediation, lightweight compositions, which is one of the more areas that we're kind of, that touches the areas that we're dealing in, and medical applications, cryogenics, and transparent installations, just to name a few. And there are actually even more than that that they're involved in. So the research is broad, the areas are broad, and we're not limited to just one particular area. And I kind of enjoyed the idea of seeing the broad research that's involved with patenting this kind of technology. Let me see, I may have opened it, and won't change. There we go. Okay. So in this particular slide here, what we're addressing is the economic viability. So in order for this process, we know that the inventions that are being developed are inventions that are noteworthy. It's worth promoting science. It's continuously being involved with national security. So with that being the case, here in the economic viability area, these are just some of the areas that they focus on through the National Science Foundation targets in terms of being able to provide their funding. Now, This organization in last year alone put in $9.54 billion in research. And so university research is a major focal point for what they do. And the grants and the resources and the funds that continue to come into it are pouring into it because of the type of work that's coming out of it. But what you see here are just a variety of the areas that they're placing that research into. And the biological sciences, the computer information, engineering, of course, social behaviors and economic sciences. And there's just it's a vast broad variety of areas that they're focused on, and the funding that's needed in order to continue this research is going to be placed. Now, this just kind of touches briefly on the area in which I was having some exposure to. In the group with Dr. Arnold, what we were dealing with was the ability to take this particular substance that we're all familiar with, and it's just an egg white. The egg white that you see on the left was turned into what eventually the arrow is pointing to, which was the aerogel that was allowed to capture about 98.2% of the ionic impurities inside of this water. That water and the specks that you see in there graphically is the impurities that's actually inside of this water. Now, by taking this egg white and taking it through a process of moving it into the freeze dried. It's first freeze dried, and then the freeze dried component is then moved into the cooking of the freeze dried product, egg white protein, and then it's turned into a carbon. And this carbon is what you're looking at, or a form of a carbon for this illustration. And what we do is at that point is that they then begin to slice into this carbon, opening it up, and then there are all kinds of of interconnecting fibers that the carbon produces that allows for this filtration to take place. And in that process, the resulting at the end of it, at the very bottom here, you can see is fresh water. Now, this process that's been currently been developed right now results in 99.9% of the nano and microplastics contaminants being removed from the water, which I thought was just fascinating. It's drinkable water. You can only imagine what this type of technology would be when moved into the marketplace. And if, of course, someone has taken time to develop it, and the amount of research that goes into doing this type of study obviously has to be protected. This speaks a little bit more to that particular product, that invention that's actually taken place. You see where they are, the proteins in the egg whites are then freeze dried, and then it moves over into the next phase as it's cooked at the 900 degrees Celsius. And that particular baking process in these special ovens that are used is what is allowing that to happen. And so that indication here, I think it's a number B, from what I can tell here, is number B is where you're seeing they're actually cutting into that, and the separation of that is what you're looking at below, when you're seeing the illustrations where the little red lines, if you can see that, is actually showing you just what it actually looks like. And these fibers are laid in the very thin sheets, and the thin sheets are put together, and this is what's the water's passing through. Now, once that process is complete, this is here, the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 is what has been, for the most part, created to allow the protection of these patents. And they're working directly with the universities. This application and the disclosures that you see there is what that's addressing. The patents is actually one of Dr. Arnold's patents that was done earlier. And the applications and disclosures are what was done in terms of how that process took place before it became a patent. We have it here at Princeton, and there's an office of trade and licensing that actually is called OTL, and they actually work very closely with the professors, the postdoc students, in order to be able to ensure that their research is protected, and that the research is allowed to flourish in the industry as it moves to the next phases of being marketed into the industry. Now, what we're talking about here is licensing and agreements. ownership. Do you lose everything once you get involved in the process of developing a product? And the answer to that is no. Does the university have the ability to have a stake, become a stakeholder? Are they involved with that process of the product that's been developed? And then, yes, they do, and they are allowed to do that. And that's what the Bayh-Dole, the Bayh-Dole, legislation was about, allowing that to actually take place, where universities could be involved in owning and having an ownership stake in these types of technologies. And the benefits, of course, can come back to you. There are ways that you, as an inventor of this kind of technology, and the reason that takes place, needless to say, is that the equipment alone. I was looking at the cost involved, for example, in some of the scanning equipment. It ranged anywhere from about $50,000, I think was the leased in on for used technology, up to about $1 million, just for these, just for the technology itself that's used to do the scanning and some of the work that's involved. So when you're really involved with this type of research, it's a very costly process, and that's why universities are heavily funded through the United States government. Once that process is completed, you see here where it shows you where the startup or licensing. If you decide that you want to spin off into a startup, you can do that. If you decide that you want to move that product to some of the larger companies, like in the pandemic era, where they decided to take the developments and move it over to companies that already had distribution, then this is kind of an example of that and what that can look like. Whether it's you as a small mom and pop shop, and you want to take it and continue to work with it, or you may want to turn it over to a larger industry and allow them to move forward through licensing processes. And that's what the office here of technology and licensing will help you and assist in that process. And that's, again, is where the revenue comes back. As these things are done and as this research is established, you're able to now take that research, allow that research to become a means of generating additional resources that are now reinvested back with the universities, back to the inventors who there's processes where they can share in the financial rewards of that kind of development. And this is where the cycle begins all over again. It starts all over again. So it's a 30,000 square foot view of just what actually happens. But I think the research, at the end of the day, when you want to know why so much is being focused on research, this is why, because it is a cornerstone of the university process. And I just wanted to pass that out. So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Afia Ofori-Mensah, and I am Director of Equitable Postgraduate Academic Opportunity in the Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity, which is Princeton University's center focusing on the needs of first-generation college students, low-income students, and others historically excluded or marginalized within higher education. An initiative of the Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity is the Aspiring Scholars and Professionals Program. This is an internship program that we began 2 years ago in partnership with the Prison Teaching Initiative that was designed to introduce students from a variety of backgrounds to the possibility of taking on careers in higher education by pairing them with Princeton faculty and staff members in order to conduct research or do professional internships in the summer, and then encouraging them to continue on with undergraduate research or professional internships on their home campuses during the academic year.